Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Lucidworks Chief Technology Officer, Grant Ingersoll.
All right. Welcome back. Last talk of the day. First off, I just want to, again, thank everybody for showing up. I still see there's a good number of you in the audience, so I don't feel so alone up here. It's always a little bit risky being that last talk of the day, but hopefully I can treat you to some fun insights on how I'm thinking about personalization and things like that. Before we get started, I said it this morning, but I want to say it again. Just a huge shout out to all the people behind the scenes who make this conference possible. Things that people like the crew in back, who you all don't get to see, but who I've gotten to know over the years. They produced here last year as well and did a great job again this year, as well as Aaliyah and our marketing team who lead up and do a lot of work to put on this conference. So thanks again to all of them. All right, so let's get started. I've already set the stage kind of that I wanted to talk about personalization, and so I thought what better way to talk about personalization than to, just acknowledge the fact that we live in this age of the individual. And what better way to think about and represent the individual than our favorite little unicorn here. And of course, that's all relevant to all of us too, because we either want to work at a unicorn or found a company that's going to be a unicorn, or maybe we already work for one of those unicorns. So I thought, gee, what a great way to kick off some thoughts around personalization. The other side of this is, you'll notice, this isn't just any unicorn. This is an emoji unicorn. And I think as I thought about the themes that I wanted to develop here, I thought emojis are a great way to tap into this as well. Unicorns are all about hype, and so are emojis. But more importantly, I think the interesting thing about emojis is they do something really cool for us as it relates to text, and that is they allow us to personalize our content, right? So if you think about it, this notion of bringing context and personalization is really what brings meaning to your data, especially text. If you think about it, information personalized to one person, maybe you're sending this to your sweetheart, maybe this is what you want to be receiving from your significant other, is a great example of personalization. And yet it can mean something completely different depending on the context and on the pictures and images we bring forth. And so with that kind of all kidding aside, the other kind of theme I wanted to develop throughout this is digging a little bit deeper into some of the things I think we all feel day to day, and some of the things I've seen that are part of developing a practice of personalization as part of our applications. And as I started to think about it, I'm often one of these people that, I get a little cynical when I see the hype train coming about things like big data and deep learning and AI and how all the bots are going to end the world for us. And so I thought, what better way to title a talk than to think about, it's not big data, it's your data, right? And I think that encourages a really important shift in the way we as engineers and application developers think about building applications, right? Big data is often about your ego as an engineer, right? How big of a system can I build? How many petabytes can I put in it? Whereas your data or your customer's data shifts that mindset to what matters to that person. And so I think we're kind of leaving this age of big data, and it's going to be all about personalized data. And in fact, I think, when you really get away from the hype of big data, this is really what it's all about, is how can I personalize things for my users, for my customers. But we often get lost in that notion of, look at me, I'm a big data engineer, and I can do really awesome and amazing things with lots of data. And it's like, well, how good is that? How useful is that for your customers? And so what I wanted to do at first here is start off by addressing some common, I think, anti-patterns of personalization, and I think they come from this mindset of it's all about what I'm as an engineer building, the systems I'm building, as opposed to what problem am I solving for the customer. And so I want to start off with a few conversations that I've paraphrased from, that are based off of conversations I've had with customers and at conferences in various places over the years. I've paraphrased these, and I've of course exaggerated them because, you know, what else makes for a good story if you don't exaggerate the truth just a little bit. But so we've got our two friends here, our two favorite emojis, and you know, one of the things I often see, I come in, and especially in the big data era, I see people come in and say, well, you know, I've got 100 petabytes of data on HDFS. And then, you know, somebody who's maybe a little bit skeptical might say, wow, that's really cool. I know. I mean, I've seen these HDFS systems. It's really hard to do that. It takes a lot of people. And so I say, that's really cool. And then I say, well, what's in it? Stuff. Or maybe one a little bit closer to a search engineer's heart. How many queries per second does your system handle? Anybody want to venture guess? 25,000 QPS. Amazing, right? People out there doing 25,000 QPS with solar, maybe not more, 20,000, I don't know, I'm making it up, but some really large number, right? Next question, how many of those are rewrites? In other words, the user typed in their first query and the results sucked, and so they typed in another query. Now, notice too, this is emoji inception going on here right now. I don't know. Why are you asking me this? This is kind of annoying. I'm an engineer. I worry about fault tolerance. How many of those results didn't give any answers? You're frustrating me now. Go away. How many of those results did you get right? How many of you engineers can answer? How many of your results are right? Come on, none of you? How many years have you been coming to Lucene Revolution and hearing us preach about relevance? Come on. Go ask marketing. If you think about it, that 25,000 QPS, what if you could have 10% less queries in your system by being 10% better at answering questions? Right? What if your system was more personalized, more capable of answering questions? Right? Some good food for thought there as we as systems engineers focus so much on making sure this stuff doesn't fail on Black Friday, right? But we often forget about these kinds of things. This one's my favorite because I can't tell you how many diagrams I've seen like that. We are all very good. We're not artists, but we are all very good at producing these kinds of things, right? It's like we have this fetish for producing complex diagrams that only we as engineers can ever read, right? Tell me, what good does that do the business? Now, of course, I'm picking on that one, and we need to, of course, document our architectures and all of those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, when you think about an engineer's job, it's often to simplify the solution as much as possible. And so I would encourage you to think about that, because at the end of the day, even though we're going to build complex systems, it's all about the users and what the users are trying to accomplish. And that's ultimately the theme behind this personalization. And if we start to think about how can we simplify our applications underneath the hood, we might be able to focus a lot more on how can we better answer questions for users. This is one of the things I love about the work that the solar team has been doing around adding analytics capabilities into solar and adding new interfaces for other people to be able to query against the engine, like SQL and graph storage and all of that. Because, you know, of course I recognize we live in a complex world, but let's make it less complex by recognizing that we have all the data we want and need in the solar system, and so then let's take advantage of asking questions of it there. That then will lead, I think, to engineers not creating more complexity, but actually reducing complexity and allowing the business to focus more on personalization. And so it's with that in mind, I want to take a deeper look at personalization. And no, when I'm talking about personalization, this isn't always just about machine learning or AI or any of these new algorithms that you're seeing that can really dig into the data and identify patterns in the way users are doing, but it's about how we collectively as a community can take our base of Solar now and build out that next level of personalization that we know our customers and our users are going to want. And so, what is personalization? And if you haven't guessed by now, the theme of this talk is emojis all throughout, okay? So let's take a look at some of these high-level ideas around personalization, and then we'll wrap up by thinking about, well, what would it take to actually implement some of this stuff? So first and foremost, of course, when we build a personalized system, we need to be on topic, we need to be relevant, we need to be able to achieve high levels of precision and recall and NDCG and all of that kind of stuff. But more importantly, I think we also need to recognize what we're ultimately trying to accomplish here is to give a user that light bulb moment, that aha. And boy, wouldn't it be great if we had metrics like how many ahas did our users have when working with our data. Now, of course, we try to simulate and measure these kinds of things through clicks and all of that, but I think when we take a step back, it really helps us get a deeper and more important understanding of relevance by looking at how is this stuff on topic, how is it relevant. Going a little bit deeper, I think when you start to peel back the layers of personalization, you start to see a few other themes come into play. First and foremost, or maybe not foremost, but first off, it's timely. Well, think about what timely means. I don't just mean it's the latest stuff. Anybody can do, star: sort by date, right? In fact, you don't need a search engine to do that. Databases have been sorting by columns for, as long as they've existed. One of the reasons why we're using a search engine is we can do a lot more interesting types of sorts, if you think about it. And so it's really, in a personalization context, it's about the latest stuff for that person, right? Imagine you're back in grad school and you're doing your PhD on information retrieval, right? And you go in and your first day, you sit down at the search engine because, of course, you do search for your work, right? And you start to say, give me all of the information about information retrieval. Well, a good personalized search engine in that context would start with all of the founding content from the information retrieval field. The likes of Cleverton and Cranfield and Sultan and all of those early founders back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and for some of us who are younger in the audience, the 80s and 90s even, so that you can build out that foundation around your knowledge, right? That's personalization in perhaps a grad school context, whereas personalization for, somebody who's a news junkie may be just what has happened since I last checked my Twitter feed or my news feed or anything along those lines, right? In fact, I was at a customer the other day and we kind of came up with in our heads a metric of precision at today. It's not really a thing, but it kind of is a thing because all they really care about is what's relevant that I don't know since I last looked at this data yesterday. These are often like intelligence analysts and things like that, financial news, all of these people kind of have this notion of what's changed since yesterday because they all feel like they have their own mental model of whatever space they're studying and they've learned everything up to that point, so then all they care about are deltas, right? And so that's kind of bringing into this notion of personalization the time factor. This kind of information also needs to be consumable, right? I think we often just in search, and Lucene is very good at doing this, it's all about keywords and 10 blue links, and you kind of get back a document. This document notion has become kind of the standard by which we showcase all of what we know about a system, and we maybe do a little bit of highlighting on it and things like that. But if you think about making content more consumable, I think that also means we need to think about how do we scale our answers, right? How do we go beyond just the 10 blue links? It's perfectly reasonable to say to a user when they ask you a certain type of question that all you need to do is give them back a snippet. Or if they ask a different type of question, maybe they do actually need something that's significantly more than a document. They might need a group of documents that are all related, and you actually show them the relationships between that content. And so again, I would encourage you to think about how do you scale your answers beyond just 10 blue links. This information also needs to be contextual. I know many of you are sitting here saying, Grant, hurry it up, I got to get to the airport, right? So you might be sitting there checking your phone, doing a search. What time do I need to leave in order to get to the airport? I think our systems need to be smarter about taking in context. And when I'm talking about systems, I'm talking about like how can we build these things into Solar such that we make it easier. And so if you think about it, my answer might be different depending on whether I'm late for a flight or if I'm lounging on the beach. Maybe I want to go deeper when I'm on the beach because I've got some spare time. Maybe you recognize that. Again, of course, it depends on whether you have that information. Or maybe I'm stuck in my office building and I want all of my content to be super focused on what can I apply to my work right now, right here and right now. Or, maybe there's a killer unicorn who's coming after you and you just need the quickest way of getting out. Of course, when we're talking about personalization, I think it's really easy to start to build systems that are very biased. And we hear the word bias, and of course there's a bias. That bias is always bad, but if you kind of think about it, personalization is a biased system. We're biasing this towards you. But I think the important thing when I think about how biases come into these systems is you want to think about what are you missing? What are you assuming about your users, about the way they interact? Are you building models that are incorrectly learning attributes of your users, and therefore all of a sudden your system isn't necessarily about personalization, but it's actually about discrimination, and I don't think any of us really want to build those kinds of systems. And so I would encourage you, if you have not, go look into a lot of the literature out there around understanding biases that get built into these kinds of systems. So for instance, how many of you actually have ever tested the fact that there's a huge bias in users to just click on the first result, regardless of what it shows you? There's actually some really good studies on web search where they'll actually take results that are ranked much further down and just put them right up at the top, and they receive all the clicks, and now all of a sudden that's the top result. It's those kinds of biases that can cause a lot of trouble. Now, there's also times where you want that to happen. I mean, we are a ranking engine, right? And and if it's Black Friday and you're trying to sell all of your inventory of whatever, make sure it's biased towards you making the most money on that Friday every year. But at the same time, take that step back and make sure you have the means to test those kinds of things. It's no longer just about unit tests for your code and maybe some relevance tests and precision, but it's also about understanding what biases you have in your system. And I think you could actually build out test frameworks to help with those kinds of things. A lot of the bandit algorithms and stuff like that can help here, A/B testing, etc., AA testing, all of that. So alongside that, I think it's really important that we make this personalization something that's transparent and something that's explainable, right? I need to know, or I think it's useful for us as system builders to at least have the capability of explaining to our users why something was done that way. And then, of course, they can decide whether they want your stupid personalization algorithm or they want your vanilla ranking or whatever. And of course, that's something you can test as well, right? But we should at least give them that option. I think most importantly, when we think about the broad strokes of personalization, it's really about how do we make this stuff relatable to the user. And one of my favorite phrases around this stuff is, how do we help people better understand what the next best action is? whether that's in e-commerce or catching bad guys or, helping researchers find the next great drug. It's all about how do we make content relatable so that we can help them take that next best action. So that's kind of my high-level, big-picture view around personalization. Let's talk a little bit about what do we actually need in a system like solar to build these kinds of things out. I think first, obviously, is an attitude of we want to do it, and that attitude should be one that we want to meet the user on their terms. We put our friend Smiley Face on the couch because he or she's in their home and it's on their terms. We're meeting them there. And I think the most critical thing that I've learned over the years here at Lucidworks and building search applications is that it's all about that UX, the user experience, right? It's not about UI. UI is a part of UX, of course, but it's all about starting with a user experience first look at it, right? This actually took me a long time to learn, and I'll be honest, I still suck at it. But one of the best things that's happened in recent years at Lucid was we hired a head of customer experience who does a really phenomenal job at this kind of thing. He has this ability to get into the heads of our users and is really great at taking feedback and then putting that into the product. And I think as you see us evolve with our product, it's getting better and better, right? But the more important thing I think about this is when you start to think about being user-centric and meeting them on your terms, it becomes more about how do you build a system for them than how do you build a system that you want to build just so you can fill out your resume or check the box that, yeah, you worked on technology X. One of the main new ways that people are asking to interact with content, I think, is through voice. And you're starting to see a real trend emerge around conversational search. And I think this is a big aspect of personalization, this ability for these systems to go back and forth and help a user clarify their ideas. And it's this notion of voice, it's one of the big reasons why in Fusion 3.0 we will actually start with the ability to accept audio as an input to our query pipelines. And then from that, you can call out to third-party transcription services like what we announced yesterday with the Watson speech-to-text and all of that kind of stuff. But I want you to, again, start to encourage you to think about how do you bring these into your system. I think I heard the other day Google announced that something like 20% of all their queries are now audio, right? You're probably starting to see your product managers ask for those kinds of features as well. I'm sure video and images may be on the future as well, especially if you're in the e-commerce space, you're in the consumer space. Next up, I think we need to bring into our search capabilities a lot more ability to measure what we're doing and a lot better capabilities around experimentation. And by experimentation, I mean this ability to do things like A/B tests, try out variants on what we think are the right ways to do things. It's so often the case I go in to see customers and all of this information about what users do with the data that you as engineers are working and integrating in the application is locked up in marketing. But I think if we start to bring that stuff home, this is why I love the fact that a lot of people are doing logs in solar nowadays, is that they can now unlock that information that helps us better understand what users are doing. But more importantly, this notion of experimentation, I think it's something that if you look at the giants in search, it's something they do every day, all day. And yet many of us here in the room only do maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 10 experiments a year. And so one of the things I think we all need to work a lot more on is how can we drive down the cost of businesses doing experimentation in these applications. If you were at my talk yesterday, you saw some things that we're doing in Fusion here around things like bandit algorithms and recording and calculating metrics around search. But I think we can do a lot more as a community by making this something that's easily available as part of the open source, the scale-out capabilities required to handle all of that kind of data and calculate those kinds of things, and thus we can then build smarter applications on top of it. Along with those metrics, then, we can start to really get a much better understanding of who our users are. I think a lot of times as engineers, those pesky users, they're the people who are always waking us up at night. And boy, wouldn't it be great if we could just get paid all this money that we get paid without ever getting woken up at night. But I think instead what we need to do is really embrace and start modeling out what a user means in a search system. And guess what? All of this modeling of users in a search system is itself a search problem, right? Because if you think about what you need for users, you start to build up profiles. What queries have they done? What actions have they taken in the system? All of those kinds of things are great search and faceting problems and can really help you understand your users. From that, you can start to ask questions, like, can I figure out what lipstick this person buys most frequently? Or can I start to figure out, is this a recent graduate, or perhaps it's a multi-millionaire? Is this somebody who values value? Or is this somebody who has an affinity for luxury brands? Or perhaps, they're a rocket scientist doing, really complex questions around research and development, or hey, perhaps they're even an alien. But at the end of the day, I think we need to start having a model for capturing this kind of stuff in Solar, because at the end of it all, this is what helps you establish a prior in statistical terms that you can then go forward with and start to predict who is this user and what are they going to do going forward. Related to all of that then is we also, I think, need the ability to bring in knowledge bases in a much more native way. I've seen some of you doing this, integrating things like DBpedia or Yago or WordNet or any of these other kind of large knowledge bases that contain everything from named entities to relationships to news events and all of that. But I don't think we as a community do a good enough job of making that easy to incorporate into our applications. We don't do a good enough job of making it something that we can do inferences on and then therefore incorporate, what we know about user, what we know about the state of the world at this point in time, and then how those things relate, such that we can then overlay that onto our ranking models. I also think, speaking of ranking models, we need to get a lot better at ranking models. Hate to tell you this, but BM25 is so yesterday. It really is. It's a good algorithm. It's a good starting point for search. It is not the finishing point for search. I was at SIG-IR, which is the main academic conference where a lot of the industry giants and academia get together. It was in beautiful Italy this summer. And every time I go to that conference, I walk away with this notion of, yeah, we've got the good baseline model really well done. BM25 is best in class for that baseline model. And boy, do we have the engineering down. We know how to make this stuff fast, and we know how to make it reliable. We're missing, though, this ability to bring in models much more quickly and effectively into our search system, this ability to learn to rank. We've got some of that capabilities coming in Solar now, but we can do a lot more. If you look at a lot of these systems, they often have this whole cascading effect of rankers, not just one re-ranking, but actually a number of re-rankings, where they're taking something like BM25 to identify that first class of documents that we then want to do further work on, and then they apply a series of machine learning models that go ever more granular in their ranking, all the way down to here's the final top 5, top 10 that I want to display on the page. And so you can ask the question, what would that kind of stuff look like in Solar? How do we make sure that that performs? Because boy, does that stuff sound expensive. How do we get those models loaded up and into the system? How do we replace them? How does it factor in with things like merges and commits and sharding and replication and all of those pieces? There's a lot of engineering work that needs to go in, but this is something I think that's actually quite critical when it comes to building out this next generation class of personalized applications. we also need to then be able to bring in those things like the user profiles. We need to be able to say, here's my general model for what I think ranking should be, and then say, here's also models that are perhaps tuned to individual users or maybe individual sets of users, again, depending on how much energy or effort you want to put into building those kinds of things. But we as a community, as solar developers, should be building this stuff in. You've seen this theme over a number of years, but I really think we have a really unique opportunity with the engine we have to build best-in-class multimodal recommendations. And the beauty of this for personalization is now all of a sudden you have a lot broader view of how you can personalize content for a specific user, because you're learning from how everybody else is, but you're also able to bring in what that particular user is doing right now or has done in the past. And that's what I really mean by multimodal recommendations. When people talk about recommendations, they often talk about just a single mode, either like collaborative filtering based or content based. But I think best in class these days really is to bring together a number of different ways of doing recommendations and then overlaying that on top of the user actions. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do here is help users discover new information even when they don't know what information they're fully looking for, right? Next up, and I think this is as we're kind of heading towards the culmination here, is where you start to get into it being an ever more important part of personalization. And I think it's really about understanding queries a whole lot better, having built-in capabilities in our query parsers to load up query intention models or query understanding models, to be able to parse out fine-grained nuances in our queries. This is really hard stuff, and that's why it's a perfect candidate for the community as a whole to invest in, because instead of all of us individually doing this as one-off, which many of us are already, we can do this as a community, hook it into the query parsing framework that's already in place, and we'll get a much better understanding. This is something we've been working on within my team already with some select customers. Happy to talk to people about this more. But it really kind of is driven off of doing deeper query log analysis and looking at things like clicks and all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, feeding that back in. It also hinges on building out query parsers that can kind of tease apart the various parts of a query such that we can get better understanding. I think this also will feed off of, again, if we tie this back to the conversational search that I talked about, it will tie it back to us having a better capabilities around natural language processing so that we can actually deal with full-on sentences. Because again, when we start switching to that voice phone medium, now all of a sudden you're going to get people typing or speaking actual real sentences again, whereas we've been so trained in search to take 2 or 3 characters and then go do our search, right? So the medium's going to change there again, and we need to be better at understanding what that user intent is, right? Because from that intent we can then do a whole bunch of things downstream to decide how best to answer this question, right? And in fact, that then leads to us, I think, adding question answering capabilities into the system, right? If you think about it, if I have intent, I can then go and make those determinations. Does this person want just an answer? Do I just need that one little snippet that says, who is the for the question, who is the president of the United States? It's Barack Obama, right? Or, if they ask the question, what are the causes of, whatever, civil war or something like that, you understand that the intent there is to go much deeper, and the user is looking for a lot more information, right? Or you might even find that the user doesn't even really want to do a search. It's just the fact that they have a bias on you have a huge cognitive bias on your site, and the fact that the only place your users can interact with you is by typing in that search box. And so that search box has become the only medium from which users can communicate with you. So they start communicating with you in lots of different ways. ultimately, since we're at a hotel, I thought I kind of liken this to this notion of a concierge, or the buzzword these days is virtual assistant. But I think all of this ties back to that kind of notion of a good virtual assistant or concierge kind of scales the way they answer questions, right? And again, that's going beyond those 10 blue links. It's going beyond the one-size-fits-all approach, right? You're scaling to meet the user's needs and what they're trying to accomplish at that point in time, not what you as an engineer are trying to accomplish as a builder of systems. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed the conference. I really hope you have safe travels home. We very much appreciate you coming and enjoying it. We appreciate all the great feedback that you have given us over the years around both solar as well as the conference. And so I want to thank you very much for your time and your efforts in getting here and being a part of this conference, and looking forward to seeing you all next year. Thank you.